I am resident of Collinwood for YouTube. Joel Sands. That's my buddy Patrick McCray. That is my buddy Alan Gallant. We are here to review the movie Something Wicked This Way Comes, starring Jason Robards, one of my favorite actors.
Robards. Did you call him Robards?
Yeah. I probably mispronounced his name.
Well, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure. It's Robards.
Robards. It's very anglicized.
Yeah, great actor. Great actor. One of the first movies I watched of his was 1,000 Clowns, which is just hilarious.
Yeah, Herb Gardner play.
Yeah. But this here, he is not being a funny man at all.
No.
Very Disney. Me and Alan touched upon this a bit before we started. Disney at this time were making live action dark films, in a sense, good films. This would be one of them.
Absolutely.
Alan, when did you first see this?
I saw it when it came out. Actually, I was really interested in this kind of genre at the time. I didn't know anything about anybody in the film except for probably Jason Robards and a few of the character actors that are in it that were familiar to me. Yeah, I saw it when it was pretty darn new.
Patrick?
This movie came out in 82, didn't it?
83.
83.
83. Yep.
83. All right. So we're sort of standing on the shoulders of 1982, and its companion at the box office would have been what? Psycho 2? When did this come out? Was this a spring release or was this a fall release?
It came out April 29th, 1983.
Yep.
1983. So it was the last movie probably most of us would have seen before Return of the Jedi. And it would be the same year as A Christmas Story also, which I think is significant because they're kind of, within 10, 20 years of the same era, if not at the same time. I guess it's not when does this take place? Because I couldn't tell if it was the 20s or the 30s or the 40s. I think they're real careful about that. There's only one car that you really see in the movie.
Yeah. It is really difficult to tell. I always placed it somewhere in the 40s or early 50s, which would be Christmas Story stuff.
Yeah, it's in and around that period. Of course, technology moved a little slower then too, so it's in and around that period. But it's before. I'll tell you what's significant about it, though. I don't think it's in the 40s because it's before the universality of radio. Because the role that books play in the movie as the main transporters. To other lands, that there aren't these other voices, and so Mr. Dark is even more exotic,
right?
His accent is more exotic because they wouldn't have even heard it; they would have nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
And so that kind of nostalgia, which we talked about beginning of several movies ago, we talked about it beginning around with the Waltons. And so on, and suddenly we were wading knee deep out of nostalgia, or almost to a point where nostalgia was its own genre that we had, for people like me and Jewel, we had not seen the birth of nostalgia. We were born in the heat of it.
Right, we were born in the heat of it, and yet we were not familiar with a lot of the eras that were being waxed nostalgia.
Yeah.
That would have been our parents that would have been familiar with those eras.
Yeah, so it was an interesting time.
Yes.
And in its own way, I think the era of nostalgia, and when we think of that, we think of sort of this amorphous period between the 20s and the late 50s, as that era.
Yeah.
And
between the little after.
It was just as fantastic a setting for the otherworldly as the future was. And I think that's one of the things that really helps this movie.
Yeah.
The future is an era when these things have been solved that were tortured by, and the past is an era where these things didn't exist.
There's also an element of cultural innocence as well as individual innocence and naivete that this movie can really sort of underscore and then inject this worldly evil into.
Yes. So it was. Oh, I'm sorry, Jewel.
No, go ahead.
Well, it was a period where Bradbury was kind of experiencing, I think, a second genesis as a cultural force. I think that probably started when The Martian Chronicles was on TV,
70s.
and because the early attempts to cinemize him had not been terribly successful. Go back and look at The Illustrated Man to see what I mean.
Yes.
And so I think movies and their special effects were finally catching up, and the culture was catching up in its appreciation of Ray Bradbury. He was becoming one of this trio of elder statesman authors, along with Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, who are often mentioned in one breath as being the still living, still vital, but now aged and respectable voices of science fiction and speculation. So it was a hell of a good time to be Ray Bradbury. It really was. And to have Disney coming to him and basically saying, how can we make this as right as we can, more or less? I know there are a few purists who have issues with one or two elements of the movie, but I think for the most part, they're pretty fond of it. One of the things that when I look back at the movie now, is that it is a better movie than we deserve as humans. It's really very good.
Yes.
And it's almost so good that you have to invent problems with it. Because I remember, a lot of the people I knew, Bradbury purists and so on, had little issues here and there. I think there were little issues with the Pam Grier character and so on that didn't match this in the book or that in the book. But those are really, I think, probably minute irrelevancies to the overall impact of the film. And this is one of the only films. Well, it's like My Favorite Year, and it's like A Christmas Story, in that you almost miss it when the narrator's not talking.
Yeah.
You're happy for that voice to be included.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that people that really want to critique this movie usually go back to the fact, well, it doesn't capture the essential feel of Bradbury's writing, his narrative, and all this.
Really?
Well, no, it's a film for one thing, as opposed to a book where you're reading the specific, the words, and there's a different sort of intellectual texture to it. Anyway, and I always felt that was always an unfair assessment to a well-done film of a book, because you can't possibly have the same experience that you have when you are reading a book, when you are watching a film. It's a different experience, a different
Sure. It's an ironic charge to level against Ray Bradbury. Who's, first great, really big, huge, arduous piece of writing was Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Was adapting Moby Dick for Houston.
Yes.
And that this should be so different and so detached is really something. So I think, I saw this just as I had started reading Ray Bradbury. I think maybe a year before I had read Martian Chronicles. And for me, she captured it enough. I mean, it's, so when I went back and read the book, in some ways, I don't remember what they were. I was almost disappointed the deviations that they put in the movie weren't there. I thought that they really fit seamlessly into the voice of the book. And in some ways, because the other excess of the book is that it can be a little dandelion wine-ish in its arguably saccharine points. And the movie tempers that. I think the movie kind of balances that awfully well. So I would almost argue that that Ray Bradbury is an author who can be accused of a few excesses. I mean, how many characters in a Bradbury story burst into tears? They're bursting into tears constantly. They must be 90% liquid. And and I love Ray. I got to meet Ray Bradbury. I got to adapt one of his stories, and he approved of the casting, saying that the fella I brought to be him was far too handsome to be him. But we went up to Big Bear, and met him, and he was so sweet. He was wonderful. His only request was that we could remove words, but we could not change words.
Right.
In the adaptation. Okay. So then it was pure. It was 100% Ray Bradbury.
Yep.
Yes. you guys talked about the year like this film is set in. I'm going to take an educated guess and say 1910. And the reason I say that is there's a scene where they throw a football. The forward pass wasn't used till 1906.
And the football's huge, too.
Yeah.
It's an oversized football compared to a modern football. So it definitely would have had to have been earlier than, I first surmised. I think the first version of this was written from a story in like 1948, and they were going to try to do it then. So it goes back a ways, and if it's still nostalgic to an earlier time from 1948, you are going back a ways. There's no doubt about that. So, if Ray Bradbury first wrote the original screenplay adapted from his 1948 short story, Black Ferris. And he first wrote that screenplay in 1958. So it came from a story from 48, was written in 58. So it has a long history. Gene Kelly was supposed to direct it, apparently. And then he took that screenplay and made it into the novel, which got published in the early 60s. So it has a pedigree that goes way back to the earlier part of Bradbury's career, which is interesting. But you're right. This is the renaissance of Ray Bradbury's career, which takes place in the 70s and 80s. Sometimes referred to it as the leisure suit era of his career, because he did wear rather broad cuffed suits.
He was a man of the future,
as we all did.
Yeah, it was a garment of tomorrow, and he was a man of tomorrow.
It was. But yeah, this thing aged like fine wine. I mean, between its initial story and what it became as a screenplay.
Yeah.
It really he had a long time to sort of ferment and sweeten and come down to this. And of course, him writing the screenplay also, I always felt like, what's your complaint about this as opposed to the book, as opposed to the short story, as opposed to the original screenplay? All of those things sort of contribute to what this thing is.
Yeah.
So the nostalgia also contributes another thing to it, and that contributes to the sort of subtle small town everyman sort of thing that you get at the outset of the book through the kid's eyes and everything else. But also everybody has regrets, which of course is what evil's going to end up feeding on in a sort of a needful things kind of way.
Yeah.
But it's very subtle and it's very pedestrian, and it's kind of like, oh, well, yes, of course she was a beauty when she was younger. Oh, well, yes, of course, these things happen even in small towns long ago, that somebody's husband leaves them and somebody's father disappears and all of this sort of thing. But of course, the central thing to it is fear and regret, I think, which is what paralyzes the protagonist, the adult protagonist, in terms of what Jason Robards is doing as Charles Holloway. He's got this story that he needs to tell his son. He finally tells it to him, but it's like, I don't know quite how to tell you. Oh, Dad, I'm tired. I mean, it's like the son dreads hearing it. It's like he knows something's coming that he doesn't want to hear about his dad. So there's all of that wonderful stuff. The inability to express, the age difference, all these things that isolate people in this movie. Various things that
is that the father's issue in the book?
I've not read the book, so I don't know.
It was a long time ago for me, and I don't remember, because I could see that being the father's issue, and they found the best middle-aged actor they could, Jason Robards.
Now, he's 61. He was actually an older. He was getting older.
Or
not
was he was just past that. Or was it a matter of they had a chance to cast Jason Robards?
Well,
so they changed the conceit there. I can see it going either way.
I could too. I'm not absolutely sure. You'd have to look into that, but it's a brilliant thing that sort of sets him apart and gives him a thing. You know, he married this woman when he was an older man, and she was younger, and they had a kid, and but he's, you know, in his so-called middle age, he sees the end of his life. He sees the end of it all. So he has got, looking back on it, he's got these regrets. He's got this, he's got that happening that really contributes to that sort of overall cast of the themes of this, the vulnerabilities of these people.
Man, yeah, Roberts does a really great job. I first saw this movie.
He does.
In a line of Disney movies, they had showed where Mickey was. There was a movie where Mickey's playing a wizard, and this movie here came on after it.
I think you're thinking of Fantasia, Jewel.
Yeah, Fantasia.
Yeah.
Fantasia. Then this came on after it, which I think was on purpose by Disney. If I do say so myself. But yeah, this movie is really, really good. I like all the little things you have going on where there are people whose lives have been affected by certain things. The football player was, you know, missing a leg, and really gritty stuff. I have no problem with that. For people who say this isn't Ray Bradbury's style, I don't know. It looks like Ray Bradbury's style.
Well, they say it's the style. They start to criticize little nuances or this special effect or that special effect, and at a certain point, you just gotta. I was amazed the first time I even read any criticism of this. I really was, and it distanced me from the movie.
Yeah.
Because every time I watched it, I thought, oh God, what am I not sophisticated enough to see that I still like this thing?
No, I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue with some people that critique it too is deep down inside they're disappointed it's not science fiction and that a flying saucer didn't come down at some point or some technology didn't rise out of the swamp that explained Mr. Doc.
It could be. I think it's secretly this. I think sometimes when a movie gets it so right, and you realize it's still a movie, it's still going to have concessions to this or that.
Sure.
But when a movie gets it so right, and that it has control over you, it's kind of like, in an AA sense, admitting that there is this thing more powerful than you are.
Higher power.
And that a higher power can be, the idea of a higher power can be very supporting, and it can also be kind of demoralizing. It's this thing that can always bring you to your emotional knees.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There's also an aspect of this movie that is disorienting. The whole carnival thing is kind of it disorients, and there's some of the actual camera work that's extremely disorienting when we first are introduced to the carnival itself, but also in that these people's personalities that have been established get sublimated to such a degree, zombified, if you will.
The other thing that's disorienting in this film is the actual design of the town, because it has so many familiar elements, and yet it seems to be radiant. If you notice, it's always this curve, and there is no, that the town of Hill Valley in Back to the Future is a town that makes sense.
Right. It's got the main street. It's got this, got that, everything.
And it all is centered on the clock tower.
Right.
There is no clock tower. I mean, they sort of try to do it with the Carnegie Library, but not really.
You get a sense of completion. It's incomplete. You never see the full buildings.
Yeah. And so, what is the hub of this town? The people.
Yeah.
The people are the hub.
Yeah.
And not even the shopkeepers, the ordinary citizens. And so who are they who don't have names in this film? They're us.
Right.
And that is a very powerful thing to suddenly pull off. And I had never thought about that until now. That we're the hub in the movie.
Yeah, it's true. And all this in spite of the fact that there are certain archetypal characters with names, like the librarian, the school teacher, the bartender, the barber. Those characters are potentially right out of Mayberry,
Yeah.
But this is a darker, and it's literally dark too. A lot of this film is shot, and this is another disorienting factor in certain scenes. It's incredibly dark. The nighttime is saturated. It's you're getting all this stuff happening in the cemetery and the and even in the library at times it gets really super dark in the stacks. When Mr. Dark's miasma is sort of going all over everything. So that I found interesting and somewhat disorienting, but also at the same time it's sort of like an evil womb coming out and swallowing these people up. And a great deal of these people they get swallowed up in different ways. Some of them actually have transformations, and some of them just become like totally subservient to the idea of what's happening in order to get their so-called dreams to come true, their wishes to come true. I'd forgotten that James Stacey was in this movie, and of course, James Stacey literally lost his left arm and his left leg in a motorcycle accident in 1973. He'd been.
Who was James Stacey?
He was the one that played the bartender.
Yeah, I know, but who was he?
But his claim to fame when I was growing up was he was in a show called Lancer, which was a Western.
Oh, okay.
And he was in that, and he was a guest star on a ton of television shows after Lancer was canceled. And then he had this tragic accident that happened, and but he acted for another 20 years after that, after he recovered from that accident. So
I recognize Royal Dano in the movie.
Yes, he's a classic character actor. I mean, the man seemed like he was in 1,000 movies. He was just a great deal of things. And I also was heartened to see that he got his back at the end. Yes, he did. So because he really got abused by this whole thing. And he was sort of a snake oil salesman, but he really wasn't. He was this nice guy who was trying to make a living selling lightning rods. And so he had this spiel, this spiel that he did. And the interesting thing is the kid, Nightshade kid, actually like gloms onto that and buys the lightning rod from him. Yeah. It's an interesting relationship there that sort of just briefly develops. It's pretty cool. I don't know what the logic there is, except to sort of get the idea of lightning and all of that sort of thing sort of in the forefront, and also to literally turn that house into a lightning rod.
Yeah.
Jonathan Pryce is here as your villain. The other people who were considered were Peter O'Toole, a great actor, and hold on, let me get the other name here. Sorry. Christopher Lee was also considered. But
Kirk Douglas was considered for Holloway too. His production company was part of it at one point. It passed through his production company, and also Peckinpah was slated to direct it at one point.
Yeah,
what an amazing that. So you could have Kirk Douglas versus Christopher Lee, directed by Sam Peckinpah.
And enough squib packs to like completely soak the drive-in theater.
Wow.
Yeah. Amazing. How these things develop. I mean, it's incredible.
Screenplay by Paul Schrader.
Protest by Ray Bradbury. I think it probably, maintain its integrity. I don't know this for a fact, but I think it probably maintained its integrity because Bradbury probably retained the rights. You know, he didn't sell the rights. He canned them over with approval, but I don't think he, you know, I think that we can probably credit some of the integrity of it to that, going through 2 or 3 production companies before it finally landed. So.
Well, other people who expressed interest in making the film, because there was a lot of things that went on. Mark Rydell and Steven Spielberg expressed interest in making the film. At this time, Walt Disney Pictures was focusing on films with more mature themes in an attempt to break free from its image as an animation and family film studio in 1981.
Didn't they do the black hole? And they did that, I think, a couple years before this.
This was just a few months before the announcement of the formation of Touchstone Studios, which would be for, you know, films like this,
yes,
and films even more mature. That would be a huge deal for them. The Disney, you know, brand name was not in very good repute, partly because things like Watcher in the Woods and Black Hole were not as
they weren't big hits,
artistically.
right? Yeah,
and so they finally had the guts. This is around the time Michael Eisner joined them to really set out on their own as with a you know, a sophisticated brand that they lived up to.
Yeah, they committed to it under Eisner. I think that was part of the key too. They really committed to going out there and finding quality stuff. So,
and I think Splash was one of the first. That was a Disney movie.
Yeah,
but it sure didn't look it because I think they put it out under the Touchstone label.
Yes,
which would be 1 year later after this
84.
movie.
Yeah.
Nice. I think they lucked out on the cast they have. I mean, because I love me some Kirk Douglas, but the town more feels like a town with actors like Jason Robards and the other actors you see. Like you said, it feels like Mayberry with those characters. And then here Jonathan Pryce rolls into town. He starts out. He's like tossing out leaflets, like he's got his back turned. He's dressed in black, and then everybody goes to the carnival. And like you said, it's like disillusion. And if you've ever been to a carnival, that's sort of how it is too.
Yeah.
Carnivals.
Well, and Bradbury's really influenced by, I think, Charles Finney's novel, Circus of Dr. Lowe.
Right.
But this is Dr. Lowe's opposite.
Yeah, for sure.
It's Circus of Dr. Lowe with Todd Browning's Freaks thrown in.
Yeah. And I like to think of them as existing in the same universe. You know, almost on polar opposite sides of the country, trying to undo what the other one has done.
Yeah.
I will say there are franchises that attempt to do circus sort of in their story, and it's not the greatest thing.
Well, now, did you see Carnival?
Carnival is great. It's a great 2 season. Is it 2 seasons or 3? I can't remember.
2 seasons.
2 seasons.
2 seasons.
I did not see Carnival. I've seen Big Fish, which has a carnival in it. I've seen the Tim Burton's Dumbo,
right, which is an up.
And I forget the other movie, but the movie I'm referring to is The Howling Freaks, which takes place in a carnival. It's just insane.
Yeah.
How do you feel like this?
I think it's like the 4th or 5th installment of the Howling franchise. This movie we're talking about here stacks up greatly. The writing's really great. The cast deliver, and Robert's character does stand up to Price, does make you applaud him because he tells a lie, or he tries to lie, and it's like you get the desperation of the character. It makes you relate to Jason's character in every way. Who wouldn't lie to protect kids?
Well, he's a great actor for one thing in this film, and so you see the struggle between his quailing and fear and his growing desire to save these children.
Oh, yeah.
And his own son in particular.
Yeah, because Jim Nightshade's dad had saved him from drowning.
Right. Saved Will from drowning.
Yeah, saved Will from drowning. Which is like, when you hear that, it's like, holy shit.
Yeah, because he was frozen. He was frozen with fear, and he didn't know how to swim.
He didn't know how to swim. He would have died.
Right.
Yeah. His dad didn't really either A, teach him, or B, never learned.
Yes.
Which, back in that day, that was probably a lot of kids.
Well, it was a lot more dangerous. You didn't have swimming pools.
Right, and also the people had a not so irrational fear of water because cholera outbreaks and all sorts of other interesting waterborne diseases were happening. So some people would actually avoid immersing themselves, except maybe in a bathtub.
When I was a teenager, I was down by Yawk River here in Connellsville, and with my cousin, and we were just standing waist deep. And we could still stand though, and this big rat went by us. He goes, "Was that a cat?" I said, "No, but it rhymes with cat."
Yeah. So, and it's the size of a cat. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I said, pretty soon you'll see a big snake. Follow it.
Joel, what were you wearing in the water at that point? Anyway,
swimming trunks, actually.
Okay.
Swimming trunks.
Okay.
What all people wear when they go into river to swim or a pool.
Nothing. So
I just didn't know what the big snake was going to be.
Oh my god.
That's right.
Oh my god.
Did a python?
Oh my god. Great fishing in that river too.
This cast is great. A lot of the people, literally, I mean, you can extract them, and they've done other roles that you can recognize, but they literally inhabit these characters because of them. Even somebody as well known at the time as Diane Ladd, who became even more well known as the 80s progressed, inhabits the character completely. It's not And I looked at first, I didn't realize who it was even, because
is that the pretty girl?
Teacher Diane Ladd is the mother of Jim.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What a clever piece of casting.
It absolutely was. And it goes totally against what we know Diane Ladd did, more outgoing characters. Also, Mary Grace Canfield, who was well known from Green Acres. She played the handyman in Green Acres. And she plays the older lady. And another actress that I didn't know called Sharon Lee played the younger version of her, who was blind. That's the first irony we get. We're going to give you what you want, but we're taking away, this other thing that's very, very dear to you. Pam Grier is in this movie as the Dust Witch.
Yes, she is.
She's amazing. She's perfect. Ellen Geer, Will Geer's daughter, who is very well known in theatrical circles, plays Mrs. Holloway, the younger wife. And she is very, very good, and is, goes into the role, and a lot of these characters do. Royal Dano, of course, is.
What do we know about the director, Jewel? Did you anything hear about the director? Because I didn't recognize.
Yeah,
the name.
actually, there's some things here not about the direction too. Hold on, about the production. Give me 1 second. Jack Clayton is your director. Films The Innocents in 1961, The Pumpkin Eater 1964, On Mother's House 1967, The Great Gatsby 1974.
Okay, with Catherine Lee Scott.
Catherine was in, right?
The Lonely Passion of Judith Howard 1987, Memento Mori 1992. So he directed from. Years active. He was born 1936, or died 1992, I guess.
So he was in his.
Died 1995. Sorry, he quit.
He was in his 40s when he made this film. I would almost bet that he got it almost solely on the strength of The Innocents. because of
And
the.
he directed The Innocents.
What's that?
He directed The Innocents with Deborah Carr and Peter Wingard.
Yes.
Wow.
The early 60s film. So you can see why he would have been chosen to direct this, because of that noirish quality, that darkness,
and
music fits too. The music is very the music is almost melodramatic in this film in places.
The score was written by several people. I know it got one pass by was it a Frenchman? Is one of those guys that film snobs love. And his score to this is famous, and then it was rejected, though. And they got James Horner, I think, to write the music.
Yes, James Horner was the final choice. Yes. And I'm not sure who else was involved in it. But, yeah, absolutely. This thing also had a rather large budget for a movie of its type for the times. It was a $20 million budget, and it didn't make its budget back in box office. I think it may have made it back in home video, which was becoming a big deal at the time, and probably in cable, too, later. But
it played forever in cable.
It did.
It was ubiquitous.
Yeah.
The kids do a really good job of, even though they're friends, being completely opposites, which I love. And both kids are great characters to follow around in this story. I love that it sort of reminds me, and I think probably Bradbury did this on purpose, how adventurous the kids are reminds me of Huck Finn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole thing is the narrator is Will.
Yeah.
So the narrator is one of the kids, which again also links to a Christmas story. So
Yeah, who narrated it?
That's a good question. I recognize the voice, but I can't quite place the name.
What is it?
I'm trying to see if I can find it, whether or not they listed it. It would have been Will. It was Arthur Hill.
The director?
Great actor, Arthur Hill, who was on the early episodes as the district attorney on Law and Order. I believe that was Arthur Hill. Let me see. Let me double check.
I think Arthur Hiller, I guess, the director.
Yeah. No, this is a different guy. This guy, he was Owen Marshall, attorney at law. He had his own TV series in the 70s. Let me see. Career. I'm going to go down through a lot of films. Was in the original Broadway production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was George, with Uta Hagen as Martha.
Wait, I don't think he was. Was he George?
Yeah, he was. He was George.
I thought that was George Grizzard.
No. Grizzard in one of the. I think Grizzard was. Let me see here. Wait a minute. Let me see what the original staging was.
He didn't play Nick?
Yeah, I'm thinking, well, not in the original production, I don't think. Let me look. I think Grizzard's would have been a little young in 62. I'm not sure. Maybe not, though. Maybe not.
Well, he would have been young for George.
Yes, definitely young for George. It would have had to have been Nick. If
yeah.
So it was Uta Hagen, Arthur Hill as George, Melinda Dillon as Honey, and George Grizzard as Nick. There you go, in the original production. Okay. He was replaced early, before the end of the year, he was replaced. But he was, yes, he was in the original production. I think, oh my God, I mean, you still had, I think Martha was played by Mercedes McCambridge at one point. That was. Wow. I'm just imagining the voice of the devil through
Zuzu. Yeah.
An
excellent evening for a cocktail party.
Elaine Stritch was in it. I think she was probably Honey. She would have been young enough to play Honey at that point. Although I can't imagine Elaine Stritch young enough.
With that voice?
I know. Maybe not. Maybe it was later. Maybe it was it might have been a 70s production which she would have been Martha. But yeah,
that's another movie, Julie. You need to see The Innocents because it's Turn of the Screw, and it's Quentin's story. You know, the ghost is named Quint, which he was described as being named in Shadows on the Wall.
Yeah,
they talk about him, and it's just a marvelous companion to the 1897 storyline. It's a film noir version of that. I
actually got to play Quint in a stage version of The Innocents, probably about 26 years ago, something like that.
Really? There's a really good version of Turn of the Screw by Jeffrey Hatcher. There's just 2 actors.
Yeah.
And the male actor plays all of the parts except for the governess.
Right. This was a full cast show. We had fog, off stage and the whole 9 yards. I hung around windows a lot in that production. It had no lines. It was great. I loved it.
But the other film, Julie, if you've never seen it and talked about it, is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Yeah.
Which is a hell of a movie.
It's a hell of a movie. It is actually
Mike Nichols?
Mike Nichols' first film.
And it may still be his best.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, he did a lot of great work. But by that time he had Jewel, you may not know Mike Nichols' history, but he started out as part of the comedy team of Nichols and May. Elaine May, who is still alive, who's a brilliant a comedian and writer. He and she had this act where they created it out of total improvisation, and they refined it and set it. But they had they had a Broadway show called An Evening with Nichols and May, where you'd go get your playbill, sit in the audience, and they would do this thing for an hour and a half, 2 hours, where they would do these various skits and so on. And I've actually got 2 of their albums from the early 60s.
Yeah, they had big comedy albums, very sophisticated comedy that people's parents would play with cocktails.
Yes, exactly. Very sophisticated urbane stuff. And they were only together for like 3 or 4 years, and then they split up. People used to think they were a couple, but they were never a couple. Elaine May went on to direct a few films, but her career kind of got stalled for various reasons. But and Mike Nichols went on to direct Broadway plays, including The Odd Couple. And interestingly enough, based on his strength as a director of comedies, because that's what he was known for in the 60s, he got the job of directing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and wanted it in black and white. The producers wanted it in color. He threatened to quit because they'd already set everything up and the cameras were set and everything else. And he says, no, you can't do that now. He says, well, we can shoot it in color and then do it in black and white. He says, are you nuts? It was, he even as a neophyte, he understood that wasn't going to work too well. And so they acquiesced, and he shot the thing in black and white. And they shot it on this set that was part of a house, so they could do things with it that they couldn't do in the play, like have scenes out on the porch and things like that. Incredible.
Roadhouse.
There's whole books have been written about that making of that film, and just amazing, incredible. Working with Burton and Taylor, who were 2 of the world's most notorious lovers and alcoholics. They literally were living the roles at that time in their lives. Elizabeth Taylor was way too young for the role, so she put on like 25 pounds and pulled it off to great aplomb with a very minimum of makeup. And Burton, as it turned out, was perfect playing this New England, even though you could still hear a little of the Welsh brogue in the back, in the back of his throat. It was brilliant. I hadn't seen when I took the role of George, I refused to watch it. I listened to a few segments of the stage play, but not the film, because I knew the film would just throw me in a tailspin. It just was I remember it being so fucking good. But it's different too because it's shot on film. So it's different. The tone and tenor of it, the intensity of certain things, different, very different. As I watched it after I was done with the production again. But yeah, that's Mike Nichols. Brilliant guy. A piece of trivia about Mike Nichols: he was completely hairless because of a childhood condition. He didn't have any hair on his head, his eyebrows, anything. So he wore throughout his life eyebrow toupees as well as regular toupees.
Wow.
Kind of a weird thing. Yeah.
What's you guys' favorite scene in this movie?
Oh, I think Mr. Dark's attack in the library.
That's pretty. Yeah.
It's awfully good. It's awfully good.
Yeah.
Jonathan Pryce is a brilliantly suitable match for Robards. And I have to divert it here just a little bit to get some opinions on this. So my mentor was the theater critic for the Hudson Review, pretty bright guy, to say the least.
Right.
And but he had private things that he really disliked. It was one of those things. Maybe drama teachers still do this, but they would have these whipping boys that they would bring out, that they would just roll their eyes if you said anything good about them. And one of the things he had was Jonathan Pryce. He hated the acting of Jonathan Pryce. He said, "Oh, it's all so obvious. Don't you see it? Of course you see it. He's terrible." And I could never figure out what the hell he was talking about.
Right.
What do you think he was talking about?
I think I don't agree with him, but that doesn't mean he wasn't a very good mentor.
Sure.
To you.
I don't agree with him either, but I've always had mixed feelings about liking a Jonathan Pryce performance ever since.
Yeah, I think that people do have strong opinions about style sometimes, or approach, or even the sound of someone's voice will set people off sometimes. It can be anything. And, I would love to have had a discussion with him as to break it down for me. Why is this obvious? Why do you think this and all that stuff? And that would be an interesting conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I happen to adore Jonathan Pryce's performance in this, and many of his other performances as well.
It might have been the quaver in his voice
when he's playing this arrogant High Sparrow guy. He's wonderful at it. But I would have dearly loved to have seen him in
an M. Butterfly.
Any of the stage plays that he's done.
Yeah.
Yes, and I've never had a chance to see.
And he had become a lightning rod later for the early stages of ethnocentric criticism.
Yes, because
for Miss Saigon.
For Miss Saigon, and I'm surprised, probably because it was an Asian character, but it was also an ethnic difference. I'm surprised that somebody didn't get the same treatment for playing Shay in Evita.
That was just a few years before.
It was. I think that got ducked because of that. It was just.
Yeah, and I think you had enough work then for Latino mestizo actors, Chicano actors that it was okay.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I think Raul Julia probably was not picking up the phone at that point. He was busy with other stuff because he would have been the go-to.
Oh yes,
for that.
Absolutely, he would have been. Because by that time he'd already established himself on Broadway in musicals.
Yes.
He'd done Two Gentlemen of Verona. It's a great effect, apparently. He got great reviews for that back in the early 70s. Diana Davila is in that as well.
Yeah.
Our
Julianka.
Diminutive Julianka, the size of a half pint. You're right. I think it was probably because Raul Julia wasn't available. But I mean,
dwarfed by Nancy Barrett.
Yes, seriously, she was tiny. It is probably still she's in obscurity, but I don't think she's passed away. So she'd be in her 70s now, I think. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen Jonathan Pryce on stage in anything. I mean, phone book. I just always liked him. Always liked him. Yeah.
This was my introduction to him. I maybe this was his first major movie.
I think it was. He's very young.
Yeah, it was. Well,
at least for American audiences. International audiences.
Okay, 1976, Voyage of the Damned. He played Joseph Menez. 1980, Breaking Glass. He played Ken. 1981, Loophole. He played Taylor. 1983, Something Wicked This Way Comes. Mr. Dark.
So, yeah.
Let's see.
I think this is
a breakthrough American film.
Yeah.
1986, Jumping Jack Flash. He plays Jack.
Sure. Sure, with Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah.
1987, Man on Fire. He plays Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. 1988, The Adventures of Baron
Munchausen.
1989, The Rachel Papers. He plays Norman. 1992, Glengarry Glen Ross. He plays James Lynch.
What a bunch of clunkers. I mean,
these are great movies. Sort of. Mostly. And of course, I remember him. Of course, he shows up in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes.
As now an elder statesman.
Right.
But right in the middle of all of that, as he's just about to turn that corner, but still has enough virility to be of several generations at once. He's Elliot Carver, the most unusual of the Bond villains in Tomorrow Never Dies, the evil publisher.
That's right. That's right. I had absolutely forgotten that he was a Bond.
He's very good in the movie.
He was fantastic. Really hated him.
Yeah, Mr. Stamper. Pull out his heart. He should have just enough time to watch it stop beating.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously he relished that role, playing, absolute.
I think he showed admirable restraint considering where the part could have gone.
Oh, yes, of course.
That movie also has Vincent Schiavelli as the surgeon of assassins, the greatest assassin on the planet, which is wonderful casting also. That movie really has a twinkle in its eye, which was interesting because it was hell to shoot. And I think they kept changing the script on the director constantly. He didn't know where it was going. And, just to show you, sometimes the chaotic production produces a great film. I think that's the best of the Brosnan Bonds, easily.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's a very good movie. It turned out swimmingly.
And Michelle Yeoh's introduction to the West.
Mm-hmm. So talk about your track records, and still down to today in terms of Price performances. It's a great track record.
Yeah. I think with Jonathan Pryce, his acting is really good, but I think in the same sense, and I don't want to try to speak for your mentor, I do sort of see what he's saying in a sense, because there's times when I watch Jonathan Pryce, whether it's in this or Glengarry Glen Ross, for example, his character is somewhat predictable at times. And I don't know if that's necessarily Jonathan's fault. It may be the way the director told him to play the character. I don't know. So
there is a quaver in his voice that he's able to maintain almost constantly.
Yeah.
That gives you the idea that he's about to just burst into flame, that he's about to go absolutely nuts, but it's always controlled.
Yeah.
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 Good. I mean, good actor. I'm not taking anything.
It also his persona, his actor self is really identifiable. It's really something else. It's not like every other this, that, or the other thing.
He doesn't disappear into roles. He disappears into Jonathan Pryce in roles.
Yeah, it's correct. It's correct. Not like we were talking about Diane Ladd being able to disappear into her role, or some of these other actors but for this role, and many of his other roles, disappearing into it would be a disservice.
Yeah,
he's Jonathan Pryce.
Yeah, I paid for Jonathan Pryce. By God, I'm going to see Jonathan Pryce.
here's a question for you guys. Favorite Jason Robards film?
I know it's a dark horse in all of this, but I personally, it's his least vital part, but the one that you, just with a quaver in his voice, you can't take your eyes off him. That's Magnolia. And then it got very dark.
Very good. It did just get very dark. I agree. That's a fine role, and I have a smaller role for him too that I really thought was riveting, and that was him as the head of the law firm in Philadelphia.
Oh yeah,
good movie.
He is so. Oh my God, I hate this guy. I really freaking hate this guy, and it's brilliant. He does such a brilliant job of it, and I'm sure that was not a comfortable role for him to be in either. And sometimes the most uncomfortable roles are the ones you do the best at.
Yeah.
You know, because he wasn't that kind of a person. He wasn't a bigot. He wasn't, he wasn't like that. But yeah, I really, that's, of course, that's again in his later canon of roles.
But he was a man who was playing, in his 50s, back when he was in his 30s.
Oh yeah, and,
always very, very weary with the world.
He also
captured that so well,
precipitously, because he was an alcoholic for so many years too. So that had a world weariness to many of his roles earlier in his career. But by the time he did this, I think he was sober.
Yeah,
I think he was sober for several years by the time he did Something Wicked. So. Yeah, and it was interesting. He was married to Lauren Bacall for a while, and she even admitted, it says, like, I just married this enigmatic, fuming alcoholic, just like the first time. I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
she had a type.
Yeah, she did.
Consider that her most sober lover was Frank Sinatra.
Yeah,
is really saying something.
Yes. And he got mad because he said something to somebody about them being engaged, and he didn't like that. So that's the end of that. He's an interesting man. Bipolar, probably.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Two things. My favorite scene is where the guy comes out with the lightning and in his hand, he just goes. Movie.
That's cathartic scene. That's very cathartic.
And my favorite Jason Robards movie, Once Upon a Time in the West.
Oh,
Excellent. He's very good.
My favorite Western. So, all four actors, it is literally their movie, which is an amazing movie. But yeah, Jonathan Pryce was a good actor. Tomorrow Never Dies, great Bond film.
Yeah.
Great Bond villain, great characters. What do you guys give this movie? 1 out of 10?
It's a 10.
Yeah, it's a 10.
Yeah.
And on various levels, it's a 10.
I think what makes it a 10 too is the fact how the kids keep getting into the situation of going back to the carnival. They stay out late. Don't leave me behind.
Well, and it was either the thick of or towards the beginning of the end of the years where, there was only so much trouble a kid could get into in a town that the kid themselves didn't create, and thus it became a life lesson. So, you were allowed out later, and you were given certain liberties that would never be considered today by parents.
Right. Literally, doors were left unlocked. All of that thing that you hear about was true.
I grew up in the very tail end of that.
Yeah.
Where even I was aware that this was a little odd, but my mother was kind of a woman of several generations. So, and it just depended on what the subject was.
Yeah, we left the back door of our house open all the time.
Did you?
People came and went. All the kids would come and went of my older brothers, myself would come and go all the time. So she left the back door open.
Is there anything you guys want to add about the film before we go?
I think, in spite of what some critics have said about it, I think it's an excellent adaptation of the story.
Yeah, it's a beautiful movie. I was really shocked by its power. Down to the last words in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It boy, if anything can make you regret not, investing in fatherhood.
Yeah.
Is that.
Yeah.
In a wistful way, not in a burning with angst way, but just
no.
Yeah.
The evil stands out so much in this film because everything else is done very realistic, naturalistically, in terms of the peaks and valleys of it. It's not overly dramatic. The music gets that way during those scenes where there's supernatural or the threat of supernatural or whatever.
Yeah, that's okay.
But that's okay because you're building to that. You're building to those bigger scenes, and that's all great. But yeah, it's and in some ways the music is more like the Grapes of Wrath, than it is about a horror situation or or whatever. Because
James Horner is going to bring that to the table.
Yeah.
And this is really only a year after Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan.
Mm-hmm.
And, he built on that with Brainstorm, which is a beautiful score, a magnificent, angelic piece of music. And then this, what a magnificent composer. Yeah. Self-repeating a little too often, maybe. But I liked what he repeated.
I was about to say he found a good lane to be in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tomorrow night I'll be covering My Summer Story. Have you guys ever seen it?
Yeah. Why are you watching My Summer Story?
Daniel Culver recommended it. It's an
interesting movie. Do you know about My Summer Story?
I do not.
It's a Christmas Story sequel.
Oh, okay.
And it does the right thing, where it takes other Ralph Parker stories. I got it right, Joel. That's the one you're watching, correct? Charles Grodin?
Yeah.
It's an interesting movie. Yeah, when are you doing that? 10:30?
Yeah, tomorrow. You guys want to join in?
Sure.
I'll show up. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to see that movie again.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Links to Alan Gallant's YouTube channel, Colin Sport After Dark. He's got a new video up. Go check it out if you haven't already. Links to Patrick McCray's Dark Shadows They Will Come Down, which is on Amazon. Go pick it up if you haven't already. It's going to be in the description box. I am Resident Colin. Gentlemen, have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow night.
Okay.